Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to another podcast with Amoda Maa. My name, as you know, is Kavi, and I'm delighted to once again be sitting on Zoom with Amoda for another conversation. Hello, Amoda.
Hello, Kavi.
Okay, let's not beat around the bush, as they say. Today, we're going to be talking about identity and non-duality, a juicy subject. Normally, we identify with being somebody as defined by our emotions, our thoughts, our likes and dislikes, our roles, what we do and what we have, etc., etc. I think everybody understands that. But the goal of the non-dual approach to liberation from suffering is to realize that identity is illusory. So, what we're going to do somehow, we haven't got this pre-planned particularly, but we're going to use Amoda's own experience in the past, many, many years ago, of this identified person, and to kind of take it from there into the exploration of what identity is, what it means to kind of give up the sense of identity. What is illusory when it comes to identity? Is it possible to give it up or lose it? You know, radical non-dualism has it that there's no one here. And yet here we sit. We'll try and get into that a little bit from a perspective of Amoda. So, I mean, having meandered through that, I'm going to hand over to you and see where you want to go with this.
Thanks. Well, let's begin with the default position, which is most people, most of the time, unless they're non-dual,
born non-dual, which actually we all are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are born without identity, and yet we accumulate identity. And so most people identify with being somebody, some body, literally a body. And with that comes a mind, because body and mind are ultimately one. They're both reflections of each other. So in other words, identification with thought, and thought is derived from what we do, what we have. In other words, who we think we are, our experiences. So our identity, the many layers of identity which end up becoming who we think we are, or who we think of ourselves as, are derived from all our experiences in life, of what we have, what we do, what we gain, what we lose, what we like, what we don't like, what we believe in, what we don't believe in, what we've been taught or trained or conditioned to hold on to or reject. And so all of that becomes our identity. And mostly that's not examined, that remains unexamined identity. It's just, like I say, the default position. Now, I could say that, of course, I too had that default position, and it was expressed most strongly in the days when I was studying and researching in academia. having been trained by my father to be a good girl and pass my exams and get good marks, I set on the road of academic achievement and believing that I could be somebody, that I would become somebody, let's put it that way. And that somebody would be somebody successful at their academic work, perhaps even pioneering with their research, somebody who had a voice and some authority that came from a qualification. In other words, a doctorate, in my case, in psychology. And so my whole life was motivated by that, to achieve that, to be that, to have proof of that, to receive recognition for that, to receive approval for that. And one fine day, that all came to a grinding crash.
Let's talk about that then.
What, the crash?
Well, there's so much to talk about in what you say. The whole building of the construct, the motivation behind the building of the construct, the tenuousness of the construct, and then, you know, the collapse of the construct. And by construct, yes, I mean, you know, the self that was Amoda, which is the same as the self that was Kavi in my own way. And everybody who's listening has suffered from the same construction. Yeah. So, you know, let's just talk a little bit about that.
The construct came undone. Yeah. And with that, all the scaffolding that upheld a sense of me as somebody, or me as striving to be somebody. So there was a kind of image of myself that I was trying to become. Yeah, the successful, the achiever, all the things that I've just touched on. So I was striving to become that. And so that image is what of self, of me, was what motivated my actions, my behavior, where I put my energy, where I put my thoughts, where I put my feelings, my emotions, and so on and so on. And that essentially built up to such a degree that it came undone. But it came undone very suddenly, and it came undone very dramatically. Now, yeah, you mentioned non-duality, identity and non-duality at the beginning of this conversation. So the goal, or one of the goals, or one of the possibilities, or of non-dual realization, or the liberation that comes from non-dual realization rather, is the undoing of the construct of me. Yeah, and in that there's a great liberation. And essentially that's the question of true inquiry, who am I, which is at the core of all at the core of the path of enlightenment, or the path of liberation. For me, that took place without any self-inquiry.
Without any context then of...
Yes. Okay. There was no context whatsoever. I wasn't on a spiritual path.
Oh, you weren't?
No. Nothing, absolutely nothing.
So this was like, it was also in the 80s, I think.
It was in the early, right through to the late 80s. There wasn't the milieu of spiritual teachings that there is now. Non-duality wasn't something that was in the in the spiritual culture, unless it was more along the lines of traditional Advaita. And so I wasn't on a spiritual path. I wasn't on even a self-development path. You know, I wasn't doing any self-help methods or anything like that. I was strictly on my academic path. I had explored Jungian work and symbology and so on. I had explored some of the transpersonal realms, but more from the point of view of an academic interest. Of course, there was a personal interest, but I hadn't really looked at myself in any way. There was no self-examination. So there was no context for it. And there was no inquiry, and there was no, so it came as a great cataclysm. And that cataclysm resulted in not just the crashing down of the construct, well, not just, I mean, that's the main part, was the crashing down of the construct of me as somebody or striving to become somebody, but it had an impact on all the structures of my life. So the two kind of imploded together. Yeah. So the academic path or career came to an end, and everything that went along with that. And so I was left as a nobody. I was left in no man's land and stripped of all concepts and constructs of who I am or who I am trying to become. Who I am trying to be. It all fell away. It was both a curse and a blessing, or rather it was a cataclysm, it seemed at the time, but also a great blessing seen in retrospect. Yeah. Because it gave me the opportunity to explore, or to live, if you like. To explore, what I mean by that is to feel the energetic impact of being nothing and nobody. You know, I literally lost everything that I owned. I literally, on a material level, I lost my home, I lost my relationship, I lost the few possessions that I had, books and clothes and so on and so on. I lost my academic path and my whole raison d'etre. So the motivation was taken away. There was nothing to strive for. And so, where I ended up very quickly, which was in a very different part of society, let's say, from the academic world and from what I had been familiar with. In that world, nobody knew anything about me. Nobody knew about my background. Nobody knew about my academia. Nobody knew about where I'd come from. Nobody knew about anything about me. So I kind of literally became nobody.
And there was a certain freedom, I think, that you probably experienced in that. So not only was it the trauma or the crushingness of losing the identity, the construct that failed, but actually the liberation.
There was a certain, excuse me, and definite liberation from the pressure and the prison of trying to be somebody, of upholding this sense of self, the sense of me as anything. And so certainly there was a great release and relief in that.
Do you think that was one of the seeds of a subsequent endless, long journey that's kind of brought you to even to this place, the seed of non-dual realization? We never really talked about that, but that's, now you describe it, that's what it sounds like.
Absolutely, yes. I again, it wasn't conscious. I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't know that's what it was happening, but it definitely was the seed of going within to explore, who am I? Who am I without these layers of identity? And that happened for me not through following any path of non-dual understanding, but by just looking within. And the first layer was looking at the need for approval that had driven my academic path. And so that was seen, that was seen. And that was a great, it felt like an ego death, or certainly one aspect of ego, not the core sense of ego, but a persona, a layer of persona. And so the need for approval came undone. Approval from my father, who actually wasn't alive then, but still the approval was alive. The need for approval was alive.
Internalized.
And then the need for approval from some vague thing, entity that I might call God, the need for approval from life, by life itself, what life brings. So that was a great exploration. So I guess that's the beginning of examining who am I.
Yeah, it also released a certain, there's so much to say about what you were talking about, but it certainly released a kind of wildness in you that had not been existent probably up until that point, because and just moving on from that, when you've talked about your past before, and you just said the construct that was demolished, but actually I see that the past, that's actually happened quite a few times in your past. You were involved in a bombing campaign, when the Turkish invaded Cyprus. You had to leave who you were. And also, right from the get-go, you were ill-defined, because your original father, the natural birth father, vamoosed within a very short time. So actually, there's been an identity issue all through your life.
Yes. So in retrospect, I can see how the early experiences of having vagueness or confusion or uncertainty around identity that's drawn from who our parents are, what our ancestry is, our culture,
brilliant,
our sort of DNA line or genetic line, whatever we want to call it, our environment, our language, even.
Yes, exactly.
All of these things were completely, I could say, fluid, fragmented, uncertain. It's like there was no real ground of identity to stand on.
Wow,
even being a girl, which obviously I am, or I have experience of female body, that's very obvious. But even that wasn't so certain, in the sense that my father, not my biological father, but my adopted father, treated me like a boy.
Yeah.
My hair was cut very short. I used to go to the barbers. He wanted me to achieve like a boy. And I wasn't allowed to play with dolls at all, or even, fluffy stuffed toys, none of the girly things. And so on and so on. And so I sort of developed, even though I wasn't a tomboy at all, I was actually very girly, but I developed a kind of boy's mind in terms of be what I wanted to be, and denied all the feminine things. So it was all very fragmented, no ground to stand on.
So no, that's right. That's why you're such a great teacher in a sense, because two things. One is that who am I? Who am I? The fundamental question of non-duality has been prevalent actually in your life, as it has for a lot of people, but yours more so than many. Mine was a stable, dysfunctional but stable English 2.1 kids and yada yada, nuclear family, but yours was all over the place. You were wondering who you were from the very get-go. And so right. Then you created this false construct, or the achiever. You try to become, we all try to become something maybe, or and so you there was the investment of right. Amoda, the thing, but it was inherently flawed from the first place.
It was, and actually all those experiences or conditions, if you like, of this life, and maybe other sort of karmic causes, if you like, or factors. I actually had a very weak ego self. I had a weak sense of myself, even though I was striving to become somebody. That was to compensate for that. But as a child and growing up, actually I had a very weak sense of self. And so all of that...
There was no brothers and sisters for any context.
No brothers and sisters, no friends.
No context.
No context. And so actually all of that served for when the construct did fall apart, because it couldn't sustain itself anymore. It happened very quickly and very suddenly.
But that didn't lead to, for many people caught in the same way, in the same trap as most people are, that would lead to an irrevocable potential for breakdown, which is catastrophic breakdown, which could lead to suicide, which could lead to addiction, which could lead to any sort of violence against oneself or against the other, to the point that it's actually very difficult to recover. In many ways, it may take years and years, or you may never do it because the investment is so great. And yet here we are with a person such as you, where that very breakdown did lead, either quickly or slowly or whatever, to a breakthrough of some kind of form. Now, I mean, to me, that's a grace, as we've talked about, I know, between us. But wow.
Yes, I mean, yeah, you're right. It could lead to all sorts of problems.
Because you'd had psychological problems before that. Sorry to interrupt, but you'd had mute problems. You'd had some psychological issues in that sense. Not, hadn't you? So, but here something happened.
Yes, again, who that was just the way it was. It was the right time for something to break through, for a breakthrough. At that point, I was able to, I don't know how it happened, but very quickly, a whole different dimension of exploration opened up to me. I was immersed in exploring all the modalities of different types of meditations, of different philosophical and esoteric teachings, metaphysical teachings, transpersonal teachings, both on in terms of the teachings themselves and also the practices. I was able to explore my own personal history and a whole plethora, or Pandora's box of previously suppressed emotions that came up from my personal history. So I had a rich Pandora's box to play with. So
and I'm sorry, but and some MDMA as well.
that was part of the Pandora's box. Yes, a great gift, unbeknownst to me, was MDMA, which allowed me to. Well, it opened my heart in a way that hadn't been opened before, and opened me to being fully present without the the fear and self-doubt that had always been there.
Wow.
Now, of course, I didn't live in an MDMA reality 24/7, although it was sometimes like that. But it actually served me. I didn't get further lost in it. I actually, if you like, contacted or were able to access parts of myself that had previously been inaccessible. And that, together with some, all the inner work I was doing, but also some very grounded, if you like, I think it was psychosynthesis at the time. So we were doing voice dialogue work and dream work and all sorts of things like that, allowed me that together with the more recreational MDMA, but which actually served my inner growth, allowed me to see into myself and let go of certain outworn ways or parts of myself and grow into something new. So it was a very rich time in that sense.
So let's kind of try and segue from this personal into the kind of non-dual kind of understanding, if you like, because but what I hear from you is that you did start to see the construct, but you didn't see it from a cold, kind of detached place. You saw everything that had created the false construct and all the motivations and reasons behind the emergence of the false construct, and you undid those. You weren't just looking from the non-dual perspective that might say life is an illusion, it's all a dream, and there's nobody here. You actually reached it through a very organic process, didn't you? Of seeing, oh my God, I was, that was inevitable when I see how much investment.
Yes.
Which is very different in a way.
Yes. I it was very, how can I say, practical or grounded, or it wasn't a mental or intellectual understanding of the non-dual perspective. It was actually in the very nitty-gritty of my life, because I went through a very long period whilst there was this richness or this wealth on the inside of exploration and untangling and growing into or growing out of, and all of that. On the material level, on the earthly level, there was great impoverishment.
Yeah.
There was nothing in terms of, nothing doing and nothing having. So I was able to somehow, those two things, that juxtaposition, allowed a very organic and grounded in the earthly experience, in the human experience, undoing of all identifications with doing and having. And just allowing what wanted to move here, what wanted to, which sometimes was not much and sometimes was, but it was, it had no, let's put it this way, it had no agenda for the outcome. Whereas the whole academic situation was totally driven by agenda for the outcome. Yeah. So I started to live life from no agenda and no striving, and more and more allowing and really surrender to what is. And of course, life continues as a human being, and you get guided here or there, or an impulse comes or nothing comes. But even when nothing came, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to be? You know, that didn't arise. So it was very, very just in the unknown, really. That's where I think that started to reveal itself more, that I was actually living from the unknown, as the unknown, without any overlay of who I think I am or who I want to be. Yeah, it didn't have that overlay. And that really laid the ground, only in retrospect, for a deeper and fuller non-dual realization, yeah, where the whole scaffolding came down.
Oh yeah. So what does that mean then? What let's move from that one, the preamble of the collapse of the false construct, because in some ways one could say, oh, well, that's that. Now I can just live kind of organically. Yeah.
Well,
it
could have been, and that would have been probably enough. Yeah.
Because there's but there's still a self in a way that's functioning. It's just not as driven by dysfunctionality or pleasing or whatever it is as the previous one. But that was not good enough. That's not enough for you. Then you had to go even further.
Well, no, I didn't know I was going further. In some ways it was enough. There was just simply that. And that was, if you like, accepted, or, you know, enjoyed, if you like. It wasn't, yeah, it just simply was that. But life, or one's inner unfoldment, has other plans. And so there was a deepening. And in that deepening, other aspects, or more other deeper aspects of the construct of self revealed themselves. Yeah. And that was the abandonment. Yeah. The core sense of abandonment from God. Yeah. Which wasn't to do with my past, which wasn't to do with my circumstances. Yeah? It was an existential landscape, and that just revealed itself. Yeah. That's not something that I sought out to look for or resolve or anything. There was just, it just revealed itself. Yeah. And that the meeting of that allowed the main pin of self to come undone. Yeah. And that's what I would call awakening. The rest of it was a preamble.
And so the main pin coming undone means
there is no longer a construct, either mental, psychological, emotional, or energetic in the subtle realm. There's no longer any construct of separation. There's no longer a me that is separate from life, from what is happening now. There is no longer a me having this experience. Yeah, so there we come to the non-dual experience, exactly, or expression, right. Nobody here. Nobody here doesn't mean that your body isn't here. Yeah, whilst you're alive, your body is here. The body is here. The whole mind-body system is here. Yeah. Nobody here means there's no self, no construct of self, of me, standing outside of life, having an experience of life. There's nobody here to whom life is happening. Therefore, there's nobody here who is trying to get anything from life, do anything to life, run away from life. It's a complete mergement with what is, which means the deepest acceptance of what is. There's nobody here to resist it or control it or manipulate it. It's all happening seamlessly as one. The radical impact of that,
yes,
is,
let's talk about
inexpressible, yeah. It's quite difficult now, which is 20 years later, to really
but
touch that fragrance, yeah, because it's moved and it's been embodied and integrated and has become very ordinary. But when that took place, and for the years, for several years following that, even I would say longer than that, 7-8 years following that, it had a radical impact.
Oh God, sorry. But the maturation that you've gone through with the articulation and exploration of this over the years has given you a certain voice to be able to speak to it in the way that you do. And what you've described is not an experience that was particular to Amoda Maa. What you're talking about is the perennial nature, the fundamental truth of the human experience when it's stripped away of all of its constructness.
That's right.
That's the nature of non-duality Advaita, is that it's not your truth. It's not my truth. It's not an experience. It is the foundation of reality as it seems. So
that's right.
It's very juicy. And I bathe in this ocean all the time, the same way you do. Maybe not to such a beautiful extent in a way, but still, as I listen to you, I try and listen to you. That description of it, as somebody else might listen to it, and it sets the mind on fire. It sets the mind of the self on fire, because it can't reconcile these two things. It can't reconcile being a Kavi with a body and a mind and this face and this beard in the world, speaking to you now, and the fundamental truth or reality that's being pointed to, which is there's no one here. Cannot reconcile those two things. So something has to happen. Either the truth that you're talking becomes just a belief, and I'm going to override any other sensation. And to me, I've seen the radical non-dualists, and they tend to not be juicy in the body or juicy in the, they laugh about it because it's a hilarious thing, but it's not really an embodied thing. Yeah, or else I don't really know what we end up talking, have this kind of juicy exploration. Sorry, you see what I'm saying?
We're talking about the nature of enlightenment. Yeah, it's like the light bulb has been, shone on the nature of illusion. Illusion not being that your body is an illusion, or your, or anything that you experience being an illusion. The illusion is the many constructs of self which define your experience of life and your experience of yourself and your experience of others and your experience of the human earthly condition. When that's all, when the light has been shone on that, it's seen to be illusory. It's made up. Yeah. And so we start to experience, that's why I say it's radical, everything. We experience relationships, we experience life, we experience what happens, we experience what doesn't happen, we experience what we like and what we don't like, what is painful and what is ecstatic. We experience all that completely differently when there's no overlay of the illusory construct of self. Yeah, that's enlightenment. Yeah. So yes, we are talking about something, not an experience, but a fundamental realization, or coming home to our original nature. Yeah, that is doesn't belong to me and doesn't belong to anybody. It's what is, when the overlay of the self constructs and layers of identity is no longer there. And we call that self-realization, we call that liberation, we call that the non-dual understanding, or recognition, call it what we like, but there it is. And it doesn't belong to anyone. Yeah, it's not something that we take possession of again, or ownership. Of course, then if we, for whatever reason, life emerges through us and we end up being, if you like, or being in the role or the expression of what we call a spiritual teacher, or whatever it is, or guide, or non-dual teacher, or whatever, then it starts to develop a unique quality or fragrance that comes through that individual.
Why does the same realization in one teacher, let's say, or human being, lead to the same realization, I'm saying, lead to a kind of cold detachedness, if you like, in one person or teacher, and actually a warm, compassionate quality in another teacher, because actually they've had the same realization?
Well, here is where it gets a little tricky, and I've contemplated and considered this in many different ways over the years, of being immersed in this particular world or scenario. A primary question comes to mind, and some possible answers come to mind as well. One is it the same realization? I like to think it is, and I used to think it is, and I still think it is the same realization.
Well, I hear a doubt somewhere in you.
Well, I can't categorically absolutely know that it is, because I'm not inside that person or that teacher or the one who's expressing it. My experience of others in this role sometimes leads me to question whether it is. I have a sense that it's the same realization, but it hasn't penetrated in the same way.
Yes.
Or that there is still a remnant of the self-construct that takes ownership of it. Yeah. And then it can become a more cold, detached upholding of that. And that's a tricky area. Yeah. We call that the tricky spiritual ego, or the subtle veneer of ego. Yeah. And that's what I think happens.
That's the re-emergence of the I as claiming
yes, because there is a re-emergence of the self. Of course, you're still here as a physiological mind-body system. Yeah. It's just not held together in the same way. It's permeable, it's open. And I think when it re-emerges, for some, it may re-emerge a little more, shall I say, vociferously. And then it can take ownership of that which has been realized. And I think then there are, on a say Zen path, or with a spiritual guru, or whatever you want to call it, you would have further
Yes,
if you
that
like,
would be the beginning.
teachings, tests,
yeah,
and so on, because
you're
that
still
does
not
sneak
a
in.
Jedi.
That's right. Yeah. So until it was completely broken open, and there's nobody here. Yeah. So there's nobody here to claim ownership. There is something here as a mind-body organism, but it functions naturally, not polluted, if you like, or tainted by self-constructs. Yeah, that's the difference. So
okay,
all of that,
let's do a quick look at that again. Yeah. Let's just, there was a jewel in there and it just went past so quickly.
You can't hold on to the jewels.
And there it is, everybody.
You can't hold on to the jewels because it doesn't come from knowledge. But we can try and touch that again.
Yeah.
What did I say?
I don't know. I think you was kind of saying, in a way, I'd only interpret badly here, that I think you were saying there's a mental realization, but something else hasn't. Yeah. Oh God, that's terrible.
It's the same realization, but inevitably, because we're still alive, we are in a body or as a body, inevitably, even after enlightenment, liberation, whatever, the mind-body organism re-emerges.
Yes.
It's still here. So there's nobody here. There's nobody here as a self-construct taking ownership of its experience. Because there's no more separation between me and the experience or the life, what's happening, what's appearing. But the mind-body organism still operates. Now, when that mind-body organism operates without any construct of ownership, then there's nobody here. But there is a mind-body organism functioning naturally, organically, transparently, permeably, and there's no taking ownership of experience with an agenda or upholding anything. In other words, the construct of ego self has not re-emerged. However, and that was your original question, why is it in some who do have the same profound undoing of the construct of self and enlightenment, then seem to express from a very subtle, usually, sometimes not so subtle, upholding of that position, which may seem to be then extreme, radical, cold, detached.
Fundamental.
Yeah. Why is it? Well, given what we're describing now, as the mind-body organism re-emerges, there has been a realization of there's nobody here because the self-construct has come undone. But with that re-emergence of the mind-body organism comes a little remnant of the ego self. The subtle veneer of ego. And that sneaks in and then ends up being expressed either as an extreme non-dual state, or it starts to play out in terms of subtle power, games, if you like, constructs, and so on. Why is it for some that comes in and for some it doesn't? Well, for that, I think that's not something we can say there's a ABC equation for, but we can look at some of the factors. For some people, their original ego construct, their sense of self is quite strong.
Yes.
Why? Because either that's the conditioning, they've been brought up in a particular configuration that seems to uphold a strong sense of self, which is healthy in some ways. For me, I didn't have that, which was not very healthy at the time. Yeah. It could be that that's the personality structure or the sacred geometry you're born into. And we can look at that from a sort of astrological point of view. You might come in as a particular quality or vibration that has a very strong sense of self, and that serves something. And for some, it's much vaguer, much more airy or watery or something. It could be karmic. Yeah. And so on. So there are many factors for that. Yeah. Now, if you look at perhaps where we started this conversation, my particular history and geometry and circumstances and configurations, because there was so much fragmentation, because there was so much unknownness about who I was, who I am, when it came undone, there wasn't much there to reform itself because I'd been battered by life and so many things had been taken away. My father had been taken away from me. My home, being in a war, everything gets taken away. Safety, certainty gets taken away, and that was right when I was a child. So I really felt that and knew what that was. So there was never certainty and safety ever again. Because of the whole PhD that I'd spent, I don't know, I can't remember, it was 12 years or more, totally given to that, came undone. Because many things in my life came undone very, very dramatically. There wasn't much ground to stand on. When it re-emerged, when this mind, body, organism re-emerged, which of course it did, it didn't have any ground to stand on. So perhaps that has something to do with it.
Well, I think it does in a way. Thank you for your explanation. I mean, there is no accounting for why that is, but I do see, for you, I think you, even though it can be quite frustrating in a way, it's kind of easier in a certain sense to say there's nobody here and that's that, and it's slam dunk. And actually, it serves a good purpose in some ways for people. Yeah, but then there has to be at some point, in my humble opinion, an exploration, a deeper exploration of what that means, of how to reconcile there being nobody here, but yet there's somebody here at the same time. And that juxtaposition of those two things, I think you enjoy. I think you like that because it actually means something in your own life. It's like wraps up your own life of being a nobody and being a somebody. And so you've dived into the depths of being a human being, on a psychological and a psycho-spiritual and a spiritual level. And this because most things that we do in life are all about ourselves. Is actually you're teaching the fundamental point for yourself, which is, what is this existence, to be a somebody and to invest so much in it and for it to be wiped out so quickly? Is that real? What is that? Who is that person? And then to be able to live as a nobody, with no identity, in a sense, nothing, an emptiness, and then to kind of build a sort of life where you talk to people about these two very things, because it does confuse the modern human being, and actually has confused human beings ad infinitum.
Yes.
Because we take ourselves to be somebody and we're not somebody.
Yeah, I love that. You're right. I love that juxtaposition, of that paradox of emptiness and fullness.
Yes. This is what you speak about all the time. I
speak about all the time, emptiness and fullness. And that emptiness and fullness includes the whole continuum of birth and death. Yeah. And again, I speak a lot about, or some about that, but all of that is it's an existential question, isn't it? It's an existential exploration.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. That's why I see for you, that actually it kind of goes beyond. And I think you're in a position these days where actually I don't really want to share too much with people, but actually I see you going beyond the kind of simple non-dual questions, which actually the non-dual questions do open us up into the existential, the perennial existential questions of what it means to be a human being. What is this that we're
which actually
experiencing?
was a question that was alive in me at a very young age, around I think around the age of 14, which is when I started exploring Jung and some others around that time. But it was like, yeah, what is this existence? What is it? What is it? It's an existential question. I mean, I should have studied philosophy, but
Yes.
I didn't, and for whatever reason, we don't have to go into that. But that was alive in me, and actually, it was what motivated me to even begin to study psychology. Now, we don't have to go. Well, we will go over this just briefly, but I've said it before. It was totally hijacked.
Yes.
That whole exploration was totally hijacked by my need to get some kind of access to a university, which ended up being experimental psychology,
so
because of certain conditions in my life. That
your desire was to follow, from 14 years old, the fundamental questions of what it means to be a human being, i.e., a different sort of psychology,
a different sort of psychology. I ended up in experimental behavioral psychology, which was absolutely anathema to me. One of the problems was nobody understood what I was talking about. And of course, when you're at school at that age, they say, well, what do you want to be? Yes. And I tried to explain that. They said, oh, why don't you become a science illustrator? Because it was a marriage of science and art, and I was trying to explain it from the existential point of view, that it's a marriage of science and art, much like Leonardo da Vinci or Jung or something. But I mean, this went way over their heads, or they thought I was too big for my own boots or something, and said, so I got led on a practical level down the road of applying for a university degree that happened to be experimental psychology. I didn't even know it was experimental psychology. And that's where I ended up. But the point of that little detour was just to say that question, the existential question, what is this existence? What does it mean to be existent as a human being?
Exactly.
Do we exist? Don't we exist? Is there such a thing as existence and non-existence, which is the whole question of emptiness and fullness? And that was alive in me way back then, and then got totally hijacked, overtaken by the direction of my studies, and also by my own need to get some damn qualification so I could be somebody.
But again, I'll point back to the divine blessing of life, which is, the karmic path that we are on. In some ways, has an extraordinary quality of bringing you to exactly the place that you wanted to go anyway. So
Absolutely.
it took you on a merry journey, and probably that journey, to be perfectly frank, in a way, brought something so deeply into your personal experience that there was never any from the top down, which can be a philosophical understanding or even a non-dual realization from what I would call the top down. But actually yours ended up in many ways coming from the inside out. And that's why you actually do have a fragrance of this. It's an inside out experience, coupled with a profound intellectual or mental understanding that you've got, because you have got that kind of quality. So it's a great marriage, I think.
Yes.
To me, I think I love it, because there's a great marriage in this teaching that you and I offer. There is a marriage of these qualities, because it's not wishy-washy. It's actually very, really trying to get to the heart of the matter in a very deep and honest way, I think.
Absolutely. And I had no idea that it would end up here in this place, the way it's expressing itself and the way it's playing itself out. I have no idea. And sometimes I come across the assumption that all so-called non-dual teachers, which I seem to be in that category, I don't like to be in any category, but there we are. But there's the assumption that a non-dual teacher, used to be something completely different, with no interest or no personal unfoldment of this, and then had a non-dual realization and suddenly jumps on the bandwagon and becomes a non-dual teacher. It's like, occasionally well, we don't have to go into the stories, but and that's, for I don't know about others, but for me, that's not the case. Like you said, and as we've described, it was a deep question right from the early days. No idea it would go through all these sort of permutations to end up as this. So yes, it's from the inside out. It couldn't be anything else.
No, and that's why you wrote that book, Embodied Enlightenment, really, was to speak to that. It was right from the get-go. I think you were talking about it. So I mean, yes, you're not very good at being included in a club of assumptions about non-dualists. I actually think that's pretty good. Do you? I think,
yes, I think that's.
I don't know whether we've dissected anything, but we certainly had a good adventure in using your own story, which is very interesting as a kind of metaphor for each of us, because each of us has the same kind of story built in somewhere, and it's up to us to find if we're called to find that juxtaposition, the meeting place between being a nobody and living in the world from an open space. That's why I loved what you talk about, openness and fullness. To be nobody still in the world, to be, for the construct of, I talk about it, the construct falls down and you live from the demolition. The demolition.
That's right.
It's a beautiful demolition. It sounds terrifying, and to a certain extent it is, but there's such an exquisite beauty.
It was the greatest.
Living from demolition.
Yeah, the greatest place, the greatest blessing. Was the demolition of self.
Yeah. All right, people, I think we're going to leave it on the demolition of Amoda and Kavi. and there are a couple of nobodies here, and I think, where are we going to meet?
Possibly in the kitchen.
Two nobodies going to probably have a bit of toast in the kitchen. Amoda, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story. Actually, it's very good.
My
very
pleasure.
Beautiful to hear the backstory of a teacher. And we'll see you again next time, we hope. Share this if you are moved to, and that's it. Nothing more to say. Amoda, thank you so much. Be well. See you soon.
Namaste.
Okay.